I met Ethan during a casual Friday at my favorite coffee shop, the kind of place where the baristas remembered your name and the playlist was always the perfect mix of nostalgic and modern. He had this easy charm that made everyone around him smile without realizing it, and when he noticed me fumbling with my laptop and spilled latte, he offered a napkin and a smile that felt like it lingered longer than it should have. From the very start, everything about him seemed too good to be true, and I remember thinking that I should probably protect my heart, but I didn't. Over the next few weeks, we fell into this effortless rhythm of coffee dates, weekend walks, and late-night texts that somehow never felt overwhelming. There were little things that hinted at his life being more complicated than he let on. Occasionally, he would zone out mid-conversation, checking his phone with this guilty look, or sometimes he would cancel plans at the last minute, blaming work emergencies or family issues. I never pried, I never pushed, because part of me believed that love required patience and trust. Then came the subtle comments that made me hesitate, like when he mentioned his friend Sophie too often, and how she had just gone through a breakup, or how he seemed to talk about another woman's problems with more familiarity than a mere friend should. I brushed it off, convincing myself that I was overthinking. Ethan's explanations were always smooth, and every time I tried to voice my concerns, he would say I was overreacting or reading too much into it, and I would relent, feeling foolish for even questioning him. Life with him felt intense but comforting, like riding a roller coaster that was thrilling but safe, or so I thought. One evening, he invited me to a fancy dinner at a rooftop restaurant. It was romantic, candlelight flickering against the city skyline, the kind of scene I had seen in movies and never imagined I'd experience. I remember feeling on top of the world, convinced that Ethan was finally opening up to me fully, that the life he had been building around me was real. But during dinner, his phone lit up with a message from someone named Lily, and his face changed in a split second, almost imperceptible if I weren't watching so closely. He smiled and apologized to me, saying it was nothing, just a friend. My intuition screamed at me, but the voice in my head that wanted to believe in love silenced it. A week later, small inconsistencies in his stories started to feel like cracks in a wall. He would mention places he had gone without me, people he had met, events I had never heard of, and yet his charm and excuses kept me tethered. I began noticing patterns in his absences, the late nights, the weekends he claimed were spent alone, but somehow never were. I found myself checking his social media subtly, looking for proof that I was being paranoid. And then, one rainy Tuesday evening, I walked into his apartment unannounced, just to surprise him, only to find signs that someone else had been there recently, a woman's scarf on the chair, 2 coffee mugs on the counter, a lipstick stain on a napkin. My heart sank, and a cold realization began to creep in. I texted him that night, asking casually if there was someone else, expecting him to laugh off the idea as he had before, but this time, there was no immediate reply. Hours passed, and my anxiety spiraled. I replayed every conversation, every absence, every slight oddity, and it all began to paint a picture I didn't want to see. I convinced myself I might be imagining things, but deep down I knew that the unease gnawing at me was real. The next morning, I confronted him, armed with the scarf and napkin as evidence, ready for a confrontation, ready for honesty, ready for him to admit that I was not imagining the signs. Instead, he looked at me with that same calm expression, said I was overreacting, and brushed it off like it was a joke. My blood ran cold, but I laughed nervously, nodding, pretending to agree, pretending that the pit in my stomach was just stress, pretending that maybe, just maybe, I was the one being dramatic. I left his apartment feeling more confused than ever, my mind racing, the unease transforming into a gnawing suspicion that maybe the truth was far worse than I had imagined. The seed of doubt had been planted, and over the next few days, I noticed patterns I had ignored before, messages he deleted too quickly, trips he forgot to tell me about, casual mentions of plans that never included me. My heart knew, but my mind refused to fully accept it. And that's when I realized that maybe I wasn't overreacting. Maybe I had been underreacting. The days after that confrontation were unbearable. Every text from him, every missed call, every little excuse felt like a piece of a puzzle I wasn't ready to put together. I started tracking his schedule, trying not to seem obvious, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played. Then came the first undeniable proof. I was at a bookstore downtown, browsing near the back where the quieter corners hid the more obscure titles, when I saw her. A woman with auburn hair tied in a messy bun, laughing at something on her phone, leaning against the shelf in a way that screamed familiarity. My stomach dropped as I realized she was wearing a necklace I had seen Ethan admire on his shelf at home, the one he claimed he had bought years ago. My heart pounded and my hands trembled, but I couldn't approach. I snapped a discreet photo, just in case, and left before either of us noticed. I felt a mixture of terror and vindication. The reality I feared was unfolding in front of my eyes. That night, I stayed awake scrolling through everything I could find online, piecing together clues like a detective obsessed. Social media posts, mutual friends' stories, subtle tags, each one painted a picture of a life he had been leading parallel to mine. I realized that this woman, the auburn-haired stranger, had been part of his world all along. She wasn't just a friend, she was a second girlfriend. My mind raced back to all the overreactions he had dismissed. Every canceled plan, every late-night text, every subtle avoidance now carried the weight of truth. I began to notice things I had brushed off before, the way he always claimed to be busy with work, but seemed energized when texting at night, the way his apartment had little details that didn't match up with my visits, the subtle traces of another life embedded in his carefully constructed persona. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and yet oddly calm, as if a part of me had been waiting for this moment all along. The next morning, I decided to confront him, armed not just with suspicion, but with evidence: the photo, the receipts, the undeniable inconsistencies I had documented over the week. I arrived at his apartment, trying to steady my shaking hands, rehearsing the words that would expose him, and when I knocked, he opened the door with that same smile, that same casual charm that had drawn me in months ago. I didn't hesitate. I held up the photo and started listing the facts, each one a nail in the coffin of the life he had portrayed to me. His eyes flickered, for the first time, a hint of panic breaking through his calm exterior. He stammered, tried to twist the story, to make me doubt myself, but I didn't falter. I realized then that he had been living a double life with meticulous precision, the way he could shift from one version of reality to another with ease. I wanted to scream, to demand explanations, to tear apart every lie, but instead, I stayed composed, letting him feel the weight of my silent fury. He finally admitted it. Yes, there had been another woman. Yes, he had been seeing her for months. Yes, he had lied about everything from the very start. The confession was anticlimactic in a way, stripped of any dramatic flourish he might have hoped for, but devastating in its finality. My mind replayed every memory, every intimate conversation, every moment I had trusted him blindly, and now I saw it all as a carefully crafted illusion. The betrayal cut deep, sharper than anything I had imagined. And just when I thought I had seen everything, he dropped the final bomb. He insisted that I wasn't the only one he had deceived, that there were moments, subtle encounters, and perhaps even other relationships I couldn't yet trace. My blood ran cold. This was no longer just a love triangle. This was a carefully orchestrated deception on a scale I hadn't anticipated. I left his apartment that night with my hands shaking, my heart pounding, a mixture of fear and adrenaline coursing through me, realizing that the story was far from over. I didn't know what to do next, but one thing was clear: I couldn't trust anything I had believed about him. Every plan I had made, every hope I had nurtured, now seemed like a cruel joke. And somewhere in the darkness of that night, I understood that discovering the truth was only the beginning. The real challenge would be untangling myself from the web he had spun without losing pieces of myself in the process. The next days were a haze of obsession and fear. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, my mind replaying every lie, every half-truth, every detail of Ethan's double life. I felt like a detective trapped in a thriller I was living firsthand, piecing together evidence and trying to anticipate his next move. I realized I couldn't just confront him anymore. He had proven he was capable of manipulating every situation, twisting words, and evading truth with ease. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started by following his patterns, the subtle hints he left, the schedules he tried to keep secret, the friends he leaned on to cover his tracks. Every social media post became a clue, every tagged photo a breadcrumb. Then, one evening, a message appeared that would change everything. It wasn't from him, but from someone who claimed to know the truth about his affairs. Her name was Claire, a friend of his second girlfriend, and she had evidence that Ethan had been leading multiple lives simultaneously, not just with me and the auburn-haired woman. He had been charming, lying, and manipulating for years, leaving a trail of broken hearts in his wake. The message included screenshots of conversations, photos from vacations I had never known about, and timestamps that proved he had been somewhere else while claiming to be with me. My hands shook as I read them, a cold fury building inside me. Every denial he had given me, every overreaction I had been accused of, now felt like a personal attack on my intelligence. I realized the scope of his deception was staggering. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a fleeting affair. This was a meticulously constructed alternate reality he had maintained, keeping me under the illusion of exclusivity while weaving lies with other women. I confronted him again, this time armed with the proof Claire had sent me. His reaction was almost theatrical: shock, indignation, then anger, as if I had accused him of something impossible. But I didn't waver. I listed every inconsistency, every proof, every timestamp, and his charm couldn't mask the cracks forming in his facade. Then came the twist I hadn't anticipated. He claimed that I was just one of many, that he didn't see me as special, and that perhaps I should feel lucky I had found out before it went any further. I felt a rage so intense it burned through every vein, yet beneath it, a cold clarity settled in. I wasn't just a victim of lies. I was a witness to manipulation so precise it would have fooled anyone. I realized then that leaving him without understanding the full extent of his deception would be a mistake. I needed to know everything, every detail, every woman, every lie, every moment he had orchestrated to maintain his web. For the next week, I became relentless. I reached out to other women, tracked his communications, observed his routines, piecing together a story so complex it felt almost unbelievable. Each revelation was worse than the last: vacations, dates, small intimate moments, all carefully scheduled around the illusion of a normal relationship with me. It was a choreography of deceit designed to make me doubt myself, to make me question my instincts. I felt a mix of revulsion and awe at the precision of his lies, but I refused to let it break me. Instead, I documented everything meticulously, planning for the day I would expose him fully, ensuring he could no longer manipulate reality to his favor. And just when I thought I had unraveled most of the puzzle, I discovered something that stopped me cold. There was evidence he had been planning to introduce a new woman into his life, someone he hadn't yet met in person, someone he had been grooming online. My stomach turned. The scale of his deception wasn't just massive, it was ongoing. He was a living lie, a person who could never be trusted, and I had been trapped in the center of it. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at my phone, heart racing, mind screaming, wondering how someone could be capable of such manipulation. And then I realized, in that cold, sleepless clarity, that my underreaction had allowed him to continue unchecked, that my patience and trust had given him space to grow his double life even further. I had been too kind, too forgiving, too willing to believe in the best of him. The truth was undeniable. I had underestimated the extent of his deception, and now I had to decide how to stop it before anyone else became a victim of his carefully curated lies. The next morning, I felt a strange combination of exhaustion and determination. Sleep had eluded me for nights, but I couldn't afford to stop now. Ethan's web of lies had become too vast, and I knew I had to act before he could ensnare anyone else. I began reaching out to everyone I could identify in his life: friends, acquaintances, even colleagues, quietly, without revealing my own position yet, trying to confirm the patterns I had uncovered. Every conversation, every subtle nod of recognition, every shared story confirmed that I was dealing with a man who had perfected the art of deception. By midweek, I had enough evidence to understand the breadth of his duplicity. Multiple women, carefully constructed personalities for each, meticulously timed meetings, even financial manipulations to maintain appearances. It was staggering. I felt a mixture of disgust and fascination, realizing the man I thought I knew had been living multiple lives in parallel, each one as convincing as the last. And then the unthinkable happened. While reviewing his online messages one night, I found an interaction with someone who wasn't listed anywhere in my previous discoveries. The messages were flirty, urgent, and detailed plans for a meeting that was scheduled just days from now. Whoever this person was, she was new, and Ethan was already attempting to weave her into his life seamlessly. My heart sank. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about prevention, about stopping him before more people were hurt. I confronted him again, this time with the full weight of my evidence, every screenshot, every message, every recorded inconsistency laid bare. He tried his usual tactics: charm, denial, misdirection, but I was prepared. I didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't plead. I presented everything logically, systematically, without letting my emotions compromise my control. And then came his reaction, one I hadn't anticipated. He laughed. Not a nervous chuckle, not a flirtatious grin, but a cold, unsettling laugh, like he was amused by the audacity of my persistence. He admitted everything but shrugged it off as if it were normal, as if his duplicity was a game, and I had been naive to think it could be challenged. That moment, that laugh, ignited something in me I hadn't felt before, not fear, not desperation, but a cold clarity. I realized that reasoning with him, appealing to his morality, or even confronting him emotionally would never work. He had no moral compass, no empathy, no regard for anyone but himself. I had underestimated the depth of his narcissism, and now it was time to act differently. I decided to expose him fully, but in a way that ensured he couldn't manipulate the narrative again. I compiled every piece of evidence, every connection, every lie, and began carefully planning how to reveal it to all the women involved, to his friends, and even to the public if necessary. While doing so, I discovered something even more disturbing. He had been erasing traces of his double life from technology, deleting messages, covering his tracks, anticipating someone would catch on eventually. That meant I had a very narrow window to act, and if I hesitated, all proof could vanish. The adrenaline surged through me. I wasn't just confronting a cheating partner anymore. I was dismantling a life built on deception, a life that had nearly consumed me without my noticing. I began sending messages, starting with the second girlfriend I had identified, carefully wording everything so she would understand the truth without causing unnecessary drama. The responses I received were a mix of shock, betrayal, and anger. One by one, other women came forward, confirming patterns I had only suspected. The network of lies I had uncovered was even larger than I had imagined, stretching months, maybe even years, and Ethan's charm had kept everyone blinded until now. The days after exposing Ethan were a whirlwind of messages, confrontations, and confirmations. Women I had never met reached out, sharing pieces of the puzzle that painted an even darker portrait of his double life. Some had been involved for weeks, others for months, and a few hinted at years of carefully orchestrated lies. Each revelation was shocking, each confession adding weight to the reality I had feared yet somehow anticipated. Ethan tried to contact me repeatedly, apologies and justifications flowing through texts and emails, but I ignored them all. His voice, once intoxicating, now sounded hollow and manipulative even in my memory. I realized that the person I had fallen for was an illusion, a carefully crafted character he had performed flawlessly, and nothing could bring her back. By midweek, the scope of his deception had become public knowledge among the circle of women and friends I had contacted. Confrontations erupted, truths were laid bare, and Ethan's once charming reputation collapsed almost instantly. I watched from the sidelines as people I barely knew learned the man I had known was a serial deceiver, and part of me felt vindicated, even as another part mourned the time, love, and trust one had given him. But the final twist came unexpectedly. A private message arrived from someone claiming to be an old friend of Ethan's family, someone who had witnessed his manipulations long before I met him. They warned me that what I had uncovered was only a fraction of his duplicity, that he had a history of targeting people who trusted him, of creating elaborate lives to satisfy his own needs while leaving devastation behind. That revelation hit me harder than anything else. Ethan was not just a cheater. He was a pattern, a predator who thrived on deception, and I had narrowly escaped being just another casualty. It was terrifying, humbling, and yet empowering all at once. I realized that surviving this required more than just confronting him. It required reclaiming my own life, my confidence, and my trust in myself. Over the next few weeks, I focused on building boundaries, reconnecting with the friends and family I had neglected during the whirlwind with him, and learning to trust my instincts without fear. The healing was slow, but every time I reminded myself of what I had uncovered, I felt stronger, sharper, more capable of detecting deception before it could take root again. And while Ethan's shadow lingered, I understood that the power he once held over me was gone. I had turned fear and betrayal into insight, and that gave me a clarity I hadn't known before. Looking back, I realized that when he said I was overreacting, he was right. In fact, I had been underreacting. I had underestimated him, underestimated the depth of his lies, and underestimated the way someone could weave an alternate life so convincingly. But in the end, that underreaction became my awakening. I learned to trust my instincts, to recognize manipulation, and to take control of my own narrative. Ethan was gone, exposed, and powerless, and I emerged from the wreckage with a lesson burned into my memory. Never let charm override intuition, never dismiss doubt, and never underestimate the truth hiding in the details. My life moved forward, cautious, but confident, scarred but wiser, and with the understanding that surviving deception isn't just about uncovering lies, it's about reclaiming yourself.